Hey there everyone, I hope you're doing well. Today I'm going to be explaining why I think Wings of Fire's prequel Darkstalker Legends is by far the best entry in the series. I'll be going through various aspects of the book and explaining why it works so incredibly well, and I would say that it's so good to the point where I wouldn't change a single thing about this book. I wouldn't. I think it's a masterpiece. Before I continue, there are obviously going to be huge spoilers for the book, so if you haven't read it, I would highly recommend for you to not watch this video. Now, this video will be organized into 5 different sections, which are based on the aspects of the book that I think work very well and make the book as good as it is. The 5 categories being the tone of the book, the pacing, the characters, how it handles the concepts of foresight and time, and the ending. So without further ado, let's begin. Let's start by looking at the tone of the book. Now, immediately this book really sticks out to me from all the other books in the series because it is much more serious, and I think that Tui really struck the perfect balance of things in order to let this book give its maximum impact. There's a little bit of humor in the book, but the thing that I like about how it was done was that it didn't butt itself into places where it didn't belong. During times of distress for the characters or during arguments, there is no humor because, well, it shouldn't be there. I really appreciate that because humor that is out of place really takes you out of the book. Another thing that I really like about this book in terms of tone is the horror. Despite there not really being that much violence throughout the book, when there is violence, it goes all out. I think it'd be even better if this were an adult book because it'd allow for much more ruthlessness, but I'll take what I can get. What we did get in this book was definitely sufficient. In fact, it's probably the most violent book of the series, either this or The Dragonet Prophecy, and I think that was a really good decision to make because the book needs to really drill into our heads how bad animus magic can get, how evil Darkstalker can become, hence how important it is for Darkstalker to be stopped. The less violence we see, the lower the stakes feel. Fortunately, we were able to get a lot of that violence from Clearsight's vision, so the violence that actually happens in the book doesn't feel like too much to the point where it is unnatural, but we still see the extent of the consequences that could occur. I want to point out 2 events in the book that make the book as violent as it is. You can probably guess which ones they are. Yes, I am talking about the Sea Wing Massacre and Arctic's death. With the Sea Wing Massacre, I love the pure horror of it. It's been years since I first read the book, but I'm pretty sure that I was on the edge of my seat at that part. Of course, the effect wears off the more you reread it, but even so, it still feels intense after multiple rereads. So many dragons are dying left and right everywhere. Of course, you know that Fathom and Indigo have plot armor, so you know they aren't going to die, but it still feels like Albatross is a real threat, and the suspense makes it feel like they could actually die, even though you know they won't. I also have to say the part where Albatross stalks them slowly creaking towards the boat that they are hiding under and talking to them gave me the chills. And then for Arctic's death, I'm a little bit surprised that Tui was actually allowed to write that in the book. Perhaps it was allowed because it was a little bit vague when describing what exactly it looks like, but regardless, it was truly barbaric, and I love it because it really drives home the point that there are no more bright futures. Well, they're either bad or terrible, which isn't ideal. I really hope there's another death like this before the series ends. That would be amazing, but I'm not holding my breath. The last thing I have to say about the tone is how the darkness and graveness of the book gives it a much larger emotional impact. The seriousness really allows you to take this book, well, seriously, and it makes you care about these dragons and what happens in the book. It does a great job by keeping you in the story, and I just think that it's really good for a book that wants to make you think and ponder about it after it's over. The next aspect of the book I'll be analyzing is the pacing of the book. I think that the pacing of the book is done wonderfully, and I'll explain why. I'll start by saying that I love how fast-paced it is. If this were any other book, I feel like I might be on the fence about it, but for this one, I think it just works perfectly. Something that occurs time and time again in the book is to stay in the present. You know, Darkstalker's always telling Clearsight to stay in the present, to stop focusing on the bad futures. Because of how fast things change in the book, it really just makes you want to stay in the good moments forever. And then suddenly you've read 100 more pages, and suddenly everything has changed. And I don't know, it's just sad, I guess. And a part of why the pacing is so fast is because of the many time skips that we get. It's crazy. Here's a list of all the time skips in the book and which chapters they occur in. It is in the realm of possibility that I did miss something because Tui found many clever ways to give us context as to how long it was since the last chapter, but I'm pretty sure that these are all of them. From start to finish, excluding the prologue and epilogue, it is 6 years. To be fair, the earliest point is when Darkstalker hatches, so if we just count from chapter 6, which is when Clearsight goes to school for the first time, it's roughly 2 years, but still, that's a lot of time. Although I will admit that there is a little bit of incoherence in the timeline here. How is Clearsight 3 and then suddenly turning 5 1.25 years later? My only guess would be that Clearsight was nearly 4 in chapter 6, but I don't think that's likely because her parents were pretty adamant on having her go to school when she turned 3. It's likely just a small error, and I honestly don't think it matters all that much. In terms of when there are time skips though, I think that it was done very well, because if you look at which chapters have the time skips, you can see that sometimes there are large gaps in between time skips. Those really give opportunities to flesh out the characters and get to know them better. But then the time skips are what really push the story forward and let the development, mainly in Darkstalker, to happen. Clearly, Darkstalker isn't that evil near the start, so it probably wouldn't make sense for him to turn evil so quickly. So the time skips are what allow him to slowly take his power for granted even more, to the point where he essentially turns evil. You can see that the last chapter to have a time skip is chapter 24. This is when things like spiral down into chaos. It was a really good decision to stop the time skips here, because the third act of the book is really like a culmination of all the consequences and mistakes and poor decisions that the characters made earlier in the book. And even though this is by far the longest point in the book that goes without a time skip, it doesn't feel out of place. Pacing still feels consistent, because now there's so much more happening in these chapters, and all of it is so important that you can't just leave it out. The entirety of the third act is essential for wrapping up the story. Overall, at least to me, it just feels like whenever I read the book, I want to stay in the good moments forever, and I want the whole book to be just that moment. I want to stop this train of time that has a conductor that is pushing it forward way faster than it should be going, and I like that, because it makes it even more tragic. Even if you haven't read the whole book, it's pretty safe to assume that things are not going to turn out well, because if they did get a happy ending, then what's even the point of the book, right? So since you know that things are going to get worse, you want to stay in the good moments. Well, I'm not trying to tell you how you should feel while reading the book. Maybe you didn't feel like this, but I did. I also feel like the time skips and the fast-paced nature of the book projected what the characters were feeling onto us, the reader. For example, when Clearsight realized her 5th hatching day was coming up, she was like, oh wow, I can't believe I'm 5 already. It's almost like the moments that we do read are the memorable and important moments in their lives, and the part that the book skips over are the moments where it all kind of blurs together, if that makes sense. So just to conclude what I said, I love the pacing. I think it's brilliant. Every single page, and I mean it, every single page feels like it belongs. Every single page is important, and I don't think there's any filler. Everything is so memorable, and I think that if I went through every single page, I could point out at least one thing that is important for the whole book. Also, if you are wondering, just in case, about the ages, Fathom is 2 years older than Clearsight and 1 year older than Darkstalker. So at the end of the book, Clearsight is 5, Darkstalker is 6, and Fathom is 7, roughly about that. Just in case anybody was wondering, because I didn't know for sure either before researching, and sometimes it gets a little bit confusing with all the time skips. Now I'm going to be discussing the characters of this book, because I think that all the main characters are very interesting, and the book just wouldn't be the same without them. I'll be going over Clearsight, Darkstalker, Fathom, Indigo, and Whiteout. I'm basically just going to be saying what I like about them and how they contribute to the story. Starting with Clearsight, I'm just going to go right ahead and say I think she might be my favorite character in the series. For starters, she's just a likable character in general, with a lot of common sense, and every action she does has some kind of logic behind it. I also find her very relatable, as she does have some anxiety throughout the book, similar to Moon, but also probably the best thing about Clearsight is her foresight. It is definitely one of the bigger pieces of the puzzle with this book. It's just so interesting to read from her point of view and understand what it's like to be able to see every single future that could happen, and reading about her so desperately trying to change the future for the better, but having her slowly realize how things aren't going to turn out quite the way she wanted, amplifies what we would be feeling if we weren't reading from her perspective. Moving on to Darkstalker, I like him as a character very much. I wouldn't say that I personally find him that likable, despite him thinking he's very charming, but just that he is just so interesting. He is really the only villain that we get a point of view on, which makes it a much more unique perspective. Well, there's the thing, is he a villain? Darkstalker thinks he has good intentions, but his morals are very, very questionable. The further you get into the book, the more out of line he gets, and that's what makes him so interesting. To the core, I would say that he is a good dragon, but his one major flaw is that he thinks that vengeance is enough to justify doing these horrible things.
Some of the worst things imaginable have been done with the best intentions.
And he just uses dragons wronging him as an excuse for all this. And it really makes you think, if Arctic were a good father, or if the Queen hadn't hired a hitman on him, would things have turned out okay? Or was he really destined to be like this? So yeah, maybe Darkstalker wasn't the real villain. Perhaps the real villains were the enemies he made because they were essentially provoking him. So yeah, those are just some thoughts I have about his character. While I don't like him, as in I personally don't find him very charismatic, I do like his character and the challenges that he brings to the table. Next, we'll look at Fathom. I really like Fathom as a character, and I like the inclusion of him because his perspective and overall perception of animus magic is pretty much the complete opposite of Darkstalker's. Since they are both POV characters in this book, that makes the alternating POVs have much more variety, and it makes the book flow better in my opinion. I also appreciate how he took the blame, or I should say the guilt, of having most of his family killed, as I think it's completely his fault so many dragons died. The moment that Albatross killed Lagoon, Fathom should have turned Albatross's knife against him and killed his grandfather. I do understand though that it's an incredibly difficult decision, especially when you have to think quickly like that. What I like about it is that, one, it shows integrity for his character for blaming himself, but it also allows for Fathom's character to develop, to get over his mistakes, forgive himself, and to learn to be happy. The weight of his guilt also helps him not give in to Animus magic and try the best he possibly can to help Darkstalker. After Fathom, we have Indigo. I really like Indigo as a character, and her bond with Fathom is just amazing, but what I would like to bring up is how she is suspicious of Darkstalker from the very beginning. Indigo's perspective on Darkstalker brings a healthy balance, I would say. While most of the characters have faith in Darkstalker for most of the book, like Fathom and Clearsight, Indigo's there in order to add more suspicion to Darkstalker's character for the reader, which I think is very valuable. The final character I will be looking at is Whiteout, and she is probably one of the most unique characters in the entire series. For starters, she's a hybrid and an obvious one, but she is also very, for lack of a better term, weird? Perhaps abnormal would be a better word. Regardless, the thing that really stands out to me about her character is how, in some ways, seems like the polar opposite to Darkstalker. While Darkstalker looks mostly normal like a Nightwing, he is also very controlling, vengeful, and manipulative. Whiteout is not like that. The duality of the two, and therefore the point of Darkstalker, could be to represent who Darkstalker could have been. It could be suggesting that Darkstalker's decisions were what made him go down a dark path, not fate. There are many more layers to Whiteout's character that would be awesome to explore, but I think I will dig the hole this deep for now and save it for later. Now, I'm done looking at the individual characters, but before I move on to the next section of the video, I would like to say that I think the characters in this book were developed fantastically. It's impressive, really, because the book is actually quite short, and even so we care about what happens to these characters almost immediately. I don't know exactly why this is the case, but I think it just comes down to how we get introduced to the characters through their interactions and behaviors, and for Clearsight and Darkstalker more specifically, it's almost like we see so much of their life and characters because of their ability to see into the future. For us to get to know the characters, they have to do things, but when you can see into the future, you know everything that they will do right away, and it just fits in really well. So I think Tui did a great job at getting the characters familiar with us so that we could have more time in the book for the actual story instead of developing these characters. The next thing I will be discussing is how the book utilizes concepts like foresight and time. Clearsight and Darkstalker's super advanced abilities kind of give us a whole entire new perspective on the world. I feel like this section is a little bit too broad, so I'm going to be dividing this section up into even more sections. I will be going over how foresight contributes to the emotional weight of things, the themes of fate and change, and also how visions play into this all. Starting with the emotional weight, I just find it so tragic because at the start everything looks so bright up ahead. Clearsight and Darkstalker have a chance to have a happy life together, and it's just sad and kind of frustrating how things just go downhill. So at some points it kind of feels like Clearsight's power is less of a gift and more of a curse. It's like a curse of knowledge because she knows what could have been if things just went a little bit differently. So now she's mourning her dragonettes who never even existed in the first place. To her it feels so real yet so unreal at the same time. I feel like the best way of describing it all is just unfortunate. It's unfortunate that it went the way that it did, although I am very glad that Clearsight did manage to get a happy ending. Now I'm going to move on to the themes of fate and change, and I'll be honest, it's kind of mind-boggling at certain points. For example, in Chapter 10, Clearsight takes Darkstalker to a cave on a cliff, which is a place that, according to her, they would visit quite a lot. The reason she knew about it was because Darkstalker would take her there in the future. But the thing is that Darkstalker didn't know it existed. If Clearsight was going to take him because she saw him take her there, then how would Darkstalker have known about it before her in the first place? It's like the bootstrap paradox. There doesn't seem to be an origin of how they actually managed to know about it. It's like an endless loop. So yeah, it's really confusing. All I'm trying to say is that it kind of makes you think. However, one thing that is good about Clearsight's advanced foresight for the sake of the story is that things can still be unpredictable for her. Since there are millions and millions of timelines to study, she can't account for all of them. An example could be how she became the Queen's Seer. That future was not likely, so she wasn't expecting it, but it did end up happening. Something out of her control changed before she could predict that to happen. So since she can see all futures, that means that it isn't really worth it to see the unlikely ones simply because there are way too many. In fact, an argument could be made that it's better to be a normal seer. Sure, you have to interpret cryptic prophecies, but based on what we have seen before, all of those, or at least most of them, become true. It's like everything Clearsight's foresight tell her might be true. Just a possibility, there's no guarantee. In fact, statistically, if she can see all the futures, then the vast majority of them are not going to come true. I'll also touch on change because I think change is a big part of this book. It hit me especially hard because I wouldn't say that I deal with change the best, as in I just don't like it. Of course, change as a whole is isn't bad, but when it comes to changes in the book, it just makes me want to stay in certain moments forever and just keep rereading that chapter. That is one of the reasons I really appreciate the chapter where Clearsight goes with Listener to rescue the scavengers, because it felt like something that they would do earlier in the book, just friends having fun. Clearsight knew that something was going to change soon, and I'm glad that she made the most of it while she could. The last part of Foresight I'm going to be talking about is how it allowed for some genuinely chilling visions. When rereading the book, it was so cool to see all these little clues sprinkled in earlier on in the book that would come to fruition later. Probably the best example is this moment when Clearsight and Darkstalker first meet that just gave me an absolute tidal wave of goosebumps. It was like a rapid-fire sequence of a whole entire lifetime of visions condensed into not even one page. I'm going to read it out and then discuss why this had such a large impact. Darkstalker, older in the twisted crown killing dragons from across the room with a flick of his claw. Darkstalker, close to the age he was now, holding out a scroll to her with a hopeful smile. A Sea-Wing screaming in pain. Her and Darkstalker, older again, wrestling with their 6 little dragonets in a noisy, sprawling cliff house of their own. Darkstalker collapsing in front of her as thunder rumbled. Ice-Wing blood everywhere. A gift of sapphires. Sunset over a valley as she walked creakily on her ancient talons to rest beside him on their porch at peace. Opening the royal treasure room to bestow gifts on their grandchildren. 5 Nightwings writhing before the throne, screaming as they clawed out their own eyes. Betrayal woven into copper wires. A trip to the sea. A green dragon in tears. So I numbered out all these 13 visions, just so that I can refer to them efficiently. So of all these 13, number 2, 6, 7, 11, 12, and 13 came true. Some of them are a little bit vague, so I might be referring to something different, but I'm just going to go with this. So I like how it has a good balance of good visions and bad visions. It's very ominous and chilling on the first read, but the thing that makes this single series of visions so impactful is because if you read it for the second time or go back to it, you are now aware of many vague futures and what they mean, their significance. For example, a gift of sapphires. You don't know what it means, but when it comes up later in the book, you know. Or something else like number 4. You see how this is a possibility and it can happen, so it makes it even more unfortunate at the ending when you find out that it didn't end up happening. I also want to talk about number 12, A Trip to the Sea. I think this, despite being the shortest of the visions, is by far the most impactful. It's so vague that even before you read book 11, you don't know for sure what it means. Despite being only 5 short words, once you know what happens in the book and what leads to Clearsight actually going to the sea and searching for the lost continent, you are pretty much able to trace back the entire book with just the 5 words. The last thing I will be discussing about this book is its ending, and my goodness, I don't think it could have been better. The book is ultimately a tragedy, so therefore the ending is not going to be ideal. I think it struck the perfect balance between sadness while also being kind of optimistic, if it makes sense. Clearsight gets to go and explore the lost continent like she always dreamed of doing and find love, and Fathom and Indigo get to live the rest of their lives in peace, presumably. That might sound good and all, but I think what makes this ending so special and impactful was not what did happen, but what didn't. The things that never got to happen. I think that's the real tragedy. The reason why it was so emotional for Clearsight to let Darkstalker go was because she wasn't just letting Darkstalker go. She was letting go of her dragonets as well as every good version of Darkstalker for good. There's no turning back. It's just unfortunate because Clearsight and Darkstalker had been so hopeful about each other and that they were meant for each other. Little did they know that the future is very unpredictable and they can't control it nearly as much as they think they can, so it was only just a shot in the dark. Also, I just have to mention this. I am so mad that the Nightwings abandoned the Night Kingdom. I am. They basically gave up their entire kingdom for nothing. Darkstalker would never have come back, so there wasn't any danger to run from, basically. I understand that it's not really anyone's fault, because Clearsight wanted to keep listeners safe in case her plan failed, which is understandable, and then it just spread like a wildfire. It's just they had such an advanced, amazing kingdom, and we see in The Dark Secret the consequences of that decision. The Nightwings basically went from the best tribe to the worst. But overall, I'm glad it didn't end up with sunshine and rainbows. While that would have been nice and all, there's no emotional impact in that. With a happy ending, you probably aren't going to be pondering the book for days on end after, because why would you? So yeah, that's why I think the ending of the book is just the cherry on top. It was just perfect. So everything I just said in this video is why I love this book so much. There are definitely very minor issues occasionally in the book, but none of the issues are big enough for me to actually care. So that's why I would consider this book a masterpiece. I wouldn't change a single thing. Now this does beg the question, do I think there will ever be a better book in the series? I'll be honest, I doubt it. For starters, this is an incredibly high bar that Tui has set, and I don't blame her if she can't reach it again. I feel like with this book, the stars aligned. Tui knew she had to lock in, and she did, and the product was absolutely amazing. I also think that this book benefited off being a Legends novel because I find that Legends novels tend to do very well on their own. I mean, after all, that's kind of the point. It's harder for me to say any one of the main series books are the best because they are part of one big overarching story. With this, everything happens in one book, which makes it feel much more cohesive. The only thing I could possibly imagine being able to at least come close to being as good as this book would be a Legends novel on the Tree Wars. I think that a Tree Wars Legends book would be amazing, especially if it's from the point of view of the Three Queens, because we'd get another antagonistic point of view character, which is Wasp, and I think that'd make for a very interesting book. I don't know if the emotions would reach quite as high as this one, but I think if Tui were to write a Tree Wars book, it would be very, very good and at least come close. Before I sign off, I just want to say that if you like this video and you like the book, I would highly recommend checking out the Jade Mountain Archives video on this book called The Tragedy of Clearsight. I think that it beautifully summarizes the emotions that this book evokes, and if you haven't already seen it, please give it a watch. I promise you won't regret it. So I hope you enjoyed and thank you for watching.